Hello, this is Court Watch with Alex Sawyer, and I'm excited to bring you the latest episode of my podcast where I am joined by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. His state is defending a law that requires porn websites to have users enter their ID in order to access the adult content. The age verification measure is aimed at preventing obscene material from being viewed by minors online. A trade group of porn companies has challenged the age verification measures as a burden on First Amendment rights. The justices heard arguments in the dispute this week. Attorney General Paxton joins me to break down how he thinks the hearing went. Thank you so much, Attorney General Paxton, for being here and coming out to the studio for this. I left the Supreme Court yesterday, and I kind of first wanted to lay the land on the issue at hand with your case. And the first question I have is really like the dangers to minors when they're able to access porn. Like, why is legislation like this needed?
I think there's been a lot of studies on this that, it becomes potentially an addictive thing. It's also has an effect on the brain. So the younger you start viewing that stuff, the more impact it has on your behavior down the road. So there's lots of studies. I'm no expert on it. My job really was just to enforce what the Texas legislature put in place. But I do know that there are some very negative impacts of children viewing obscene material.
Right, in brain development. I think I read one of the briefs was talking about that. And then how many other states have similar laws?
I actually don't know. I know there are others that do because they were referenced in by the court, but
right.
Some of the justices
Yeah,
through other states. I know that I think there's there's a good number of potentially usually Republican states that try to protect against this, I think, scourge.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is the name of the case, Free Speech Coalition versus Paxton, right? And so a lot of people might think, oh, well, it's a free speech group representing, challenging this law. But when you look into who this group is, it's a trade group of porn companies, correct?
I guess it just doesn't sound as good to have the porn group association or whatever, the porn group trade association. So, they call it the Free Speech Coalition, which, everybody likes to have the right name, I guess.
Yeah. So I guess in terms of that free speech, okay, can you explain, is porn speech? I thought obscenity isn't protected under the First Amendment.
So, yeah, I mean, I have a very broad view of the First Amendment. And so I think adults can say whatever they want to say. Our legislature determined that children needed to be protected, and I totally agree with that. And I think it's been our history. We protect children in all kinds of ways. We don't let them sign contracts. Mm-hmm. We don't let them get married. We don't let them purchase alcohol, tobacco. We don't send them off to military service. There's all kinds of things we protect them from because their brains aren't fully developed, and they are not in a position to make good judgments. And so our legislature decided to protect them. I think it was a great call, and I think we have an interest in making sure that our children are protected. I'm definitely willing to go defend that.
Yeah, and some of the questions actually I thought were specifically about that. It was interesting to me to hear Justice Barrett. I think she talked about like the idea of content filtering, and she said like from personal experience as a mother, I'm sure is where she's coming from, like how hard it is to keep up with that on the different devices. Mm-hmm. I think there was also, I have a little note, it was Justice Alito said something like, how many parents are as tech savvy as like 15-year-olds? No. Yeah, exactly. So I even see here, whenever I cover cases, I tend to like write down where I think the justices are going to fall. And so I left having more names next to Texas. What were your thoughts? Like, were you happy with the questions? Where did you leave?
Well, I was happy with actually the other lawyer coming in admitting that we have a compelling state interest in regulating this as it relates to children. So he agreed with this. Fundamentally, that was the issue. Do we have the right to do that? And he said yes. What he said different was, and I think it's because he wants to have the cake and eat it too, he can't come out and say, oh, you can't protect children. No one would agree with him. No one would think that was right. It doesn't fit our history since the beginning of our country. It doesn't even fit most other nations' history, if any. Mm-hmm. So he tried to nuance it by saying, yes, we agree. You have a right to regulate. However, the way you did it was wrong.
Yeah.
And then that's where we got into Amy Barrett saying, well, wait a minute, this content. So what he wants us to do is do it in a way that doesn't work. That way they can say, well, we agree with you, you can do it, but you got to do it in a way that doesn't work. And that's really what they're trying to push us towards, because they don't, look, they're a business, they have a profit motive. I don't have a problem with that, but I do as it relates to these children. And so That's the crux. He's trying to keep the profits going while agreeing with us fundamentally on the issue.
And so the law right now, what's in effect is that there's an age verification measure, correct? And so like, how do what information do they input? I heard during arguments, it was like almost like there could also be like a face scan just to recognize an adult versus a minor. And is that information kept? That was another issue.
Interestingly enough, it's up to them. They're the ones, they're complaining about, you're going to keep this information. Well, you're the ones keeping it. You don't have to keep it. They can destroy it immediately. So they could tell their users if they wanted to, and they could have told the court, we're not going to keep that information. So you can make it easy for people to, at least if they're adults, you just get rid of it. And if they're kids, you don't let them on, you get rid of that. So it's really a simple answer. They just didn't acknowledge that.
It kind of seemed during our oral arguments, like when we brought up, I think there was a question about brick and mortar stores. Like when you go in to buy a magazine, you have to show your ID. So like, why not apply the same standards online?
Why are you asking such a common sense question?
Right. Well, I mean, like, so that seemed to be like a running theme. I mean, is there a different case law that they were trying to write in, or was it just because
it's just different because it's the internet, and I can't articulate their rationale or their reason for saying that's any different, because we've been checking IDs on this stuff since it started. So I don't understand. I can't make the argument on that one. That one made no sense to me. They just tried to obfuscate the issue by saying the internet's different. They had all these different reasons that didn't make any sense.
It was almost like they wanted, because they're saying the internet is different, that they want a higher level of scrutiny.
Yeah.
Like, is that, and like, what are the odds of something like that? Like,
I think the only really argument that made that I understood was the one about, well, then they're just giving us the information. We have it solved by you.
Yeah, right.
Right. I mean, solve it. All you have to do is delete it.
Yes. Yeah. So I guess if the Supreme Court were to kick this down to the Fifth Circuit, I guess one of two ways. One, if if your state wins.
When our state wins.
Okay, when your state wins, what other jurisdiction, do you think that this will be precedent then that you mentioned other red states can follow?
Yes, I think it's obviously every state law has different writing, put a different way, but the general idea of First Amendment protection as it relates to protecting children, that's really the fundamental issue. And if you saw how the court was wrestling with, well, it didn't seem, I don't know how you categorize all the justices, but I honestly think there's a chance we get all 9 of them just on different bases. So,
the one I was interested, I didn't put over on Texas side, Sotomayor.
Yeah, no, but even her, I think she's going to have a hard time. I think all of them would have a hard time, no matter how liberal they are, to say the state can't regulate it as it relates to children. That's not the precedent, that's not the history. What she, I think, is trying to do is keep it out of strict scrutiny, or once it is strict scrutiny, and maybe have a nuance. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seemed like they were really arguing over, is it going to be strict scrutiny, which is a harder to satisfy, way harder to satisfy, or is it rational basis, which we easily satisfy? I think we satisfy strict scrutiny, or is there some intermediate standard? And Justice Kavanaugh was kind of like, postulating on this, saying, hey, I don't really care what we call it. Should we find an exception under strict scrutiny? Do we create a new category of intermediate, or do we just go with rational basis? Either way, he said, the answer is the same.
Yes.
And I agree with that.
I asked about scrutiny levels too. I mean, you feel good though, even if they kicked it back, that this law would survive strict scrutiny.
I think it survives any standard they want it to. It's obviously they're the creators of the standard, and they're the ones that decide how broad that category is. They are the ones that are going to have to think about the future of this type of litigation and how they want to categorize it, because whatever they put down, they have to live with.
Off the top of my head, I think it also might have come up during oral arguments, but there's age verification measures on different, like for gambling, right? Or there's other, so like.
And they haven't sued us. They don't sue over it. Everybody accepts that's reasonable.
Okay, so there is precedent out there that okay.
Look, this was a Hail Mary. They are obviously affected by what happened because they shut down in Texas. And so this is like, well, what do you get to lose? Let's just see if we can get a scaling back somehow of what Texas passed, because that's a win for them either way, if they just get something. I didn't get the impression they were going to get that. Yeah.
And I mean, having covered the Supreme Court let the law go into effect, which usually is like a good indication to me where they might be sitting. I wanted to switch gears real quick and ask you, so you're going to the inauguration Monday. Are you planning to meet with President Trump? Have you talked to him?
So I've talked to him since he got elected. I talked to him a couple weeks ago about this whole selling of the wall and assets, which we'd already sued over. But I don't have any plans to meet with him because I figure he's got plenty to do right now. So he's got his hands full getting sworn in, and then he's got all those parties, and so I may see him.
So I should know this because I cover legal issues, but we have an immigration reporter, Stephen Dinan, and he's covered a lot of what's gone. He usually covers the litigation with Texas. And where is that standing right now? Like, what's going on with the wall? And I know there was like debate over to like the federal issue of like material being sold.
So we actually sued a couple of years ago because there was an appropriations bill passed by Congress, another branch of government, that directed the building of the wall, and Joe Biden refused. And then he started selling off assets, letting them waste and rot, paying contractors for doing nothing. And so we sued and asked the court to enforce the Appropriations Act and not let him just go, I don't have to do anything that's directed by Congress. So we won that lawsuit, and they were ordered not to sell anything. He didn't build the wall like he was supposed to, but he wasn't supposed to sell any of the assets. So we were hoping to preserve those. And then it was Trump who let me know, hey, they were selling off the assets. So we went back into court. We didn't have to file a new lawsuit. We just asked for a status update. And DOJ called us, and the Department of Justice called us, said, hey, we'll sign anything. We're not selling anything off. Because now they're worried if they were selling stuff off, they ultimately are going to be accountable for that because the judge asked for an accounting. So we haven't gotten that yet. But if they were selling assets in violation, not just of the Constitution, but a federal judge's order, I mean, they don't care about the Constitution, but a federal judge's order, he can sanction them, and that's really up to the
So
judge.
are you waiting for the accounting, or where? Okay.
So I want to know that.
How long does that usually, something like that, take? Like, when do you expect something like that to come in?
My guess is that they're going to wait till Trump's in office and then turn it over. So
you'll get it from Bondi, possibly?
Probably.
Okay.
I'm not expecting anything before then.
So I guess talking about the federal government, you've had to face off with the federal government. My question to you is your advice to Trump on how to clean house.
I think he needs to do it. He's got to put people in that will actually take very decisive action, go in and figure out, like, for instance, the Department of Justice and FBI are very corrupt. I know from personal experience. They investigated me the entire time that Biden was in office because I was suing him and with him. So they're not about justice. They're about lawfare, and they're about focusing on, ruining people's lives, and they don't care how they do it. They don't follow any laws. They don't follow the Constitution. And we have to stop that. The corruption and the lack of trust in our law enforcement.
Yes.
We cannot survive as a nation with that lack of trust. And so Pam Bondi and Kash Patel have huge opportunity to change it, because these were organizations that were started to fight organized crime, and now they are organized crime. They're tax funded organized crime to destroy people's lives that they disagree with politically.
Two thoughts. I saw a Gallup poll recently about like the trust in the courts, and it's at an all-time low. I think it was like lower than either the media or Congress, which is like really low. How disheartening is it that the American people don't have faith in their justice system?
They can't, because these judges, you have law enforcement, as I talked about, and that's unfortunately that's spread. Look what's going on in New York with Trump. It's happened to me in Texas. But you have so many judges now that they're not faithful to what the law is. They don't care. They're like, I'm in charge here. I don't care what the law says. I don't what. So I know when I go in courts in Austin, I know that they're not following the law. They don't care. They're going to make a political decision. So I can't trust them. I can't go in there if I can avoid it. I have to go somewhere else, because all anybody wants is a judge that's going to be fair and be faithful to the law, so that everybody has the same opportunity to be heard, to have access, to have a fair trial on whatever whether it's a civil issue or a criminal. All people expect or want is fairness. And when we pervert that system, we are no different than Venezuela or China or Russia. And we're under the Biden administration, we went way down that road, and it's bad.
When I was talking to different people about the weaponization of government, that phrase, it was talked about like it wasn't necessarily lawfare wasn't pulled, but like weaponization of government was. And it was, people just didn't feel comfortable with what they saw. In Texas, I'm sure economy and border and like immigration were top issues. But for you, was that something that you heard from like constituents? Was there one agency in particular that they're super troubled by? Like, was it the FBI? Is it the CIA? Is it the DOJ?
I think it's all of them. All those three are all highly distrusted at this point, and for good reason. Now, I don't think people know as much about the CIA, but the FBI and the Department of Justice have clearly gone after people for political reasons. And it's not just like one mistake. This is a strategy. And then they let people off on the other side who clearly have violated laws. And I'm not asking them not to go after Republicans. I'm saying what you're doing isn't
treat equally.
And don't spend 4 years trying to come up with something. That's not what we have so many criminals, so much criminal activity in this country because so many DAs are not prosecuting. There's so much to do to protect our people, and you're wasting resources on investigations, trying to find things on politicians you don't like.
I found you kind of just hit on a subject. I was talking to somebody, I was a pollster, a little bit about the classified documents case with Trump, and then how people saw that, but then saw Biden with classified documents. And then it was like Pence had them and turned them over. It was just kind of like all this popped up. And I think that was one that I was told was where a lot of the American people were like, they just didn't, if they don't understand the law, that's fine, but they look at like uneven treatment. And that's like what does not sit well.
Right. If they go after Biden too, then you go, well, even if they're wrong, at least they're wrong on all sides, right? But you can clearly see they left him alone. They left Biden alone, and they went after Trump and tried to put him in prison.
And I think the justification also that it was an elderly man, that a jury would be sympathetic. People were like, well, aren't they the same age?
Yeah. Look, everybody caught on, right? I mean, most people caught on. There are obviously some people that never catch on, but yeah, that's just one example of the unfairness. And that is you need to change the name to justice system to the injustice system, because that's where we're at now.
How do we fix it?
I think Trump putting Pam Bondi and Kash Patel in there, I think they have a huge job, and they're going to be targeted inside their agencies. There will be people trying to destroy them who have a vested interest, who have been there a long time, who have been part of this. I know some of the names. I've had some of those people after me. So I know that there are people that need to go away really fast. Some of them probably should be prosecuted because they don't follow the FBI and the Department of Justice do not follow the Constitution. They don't follow search and seizure laws. They don't follow other laws. They think they go to liberal judges. These judges don't care. They'll just whatever. You can do whatever you want.
Let me also, we were talking about your Texas law. I wanted to switch a little bit. We're talking about the Trump administration coming in, right? And so you're going to have a friendlier, I guess, for Texas DOJ. Any other laws that you think that are coming out of your legislature, coming out of the state, that you think won't necessarily face the litigation hurdles that we've seen from the Biden administration suing red states? Maybe not specifically Texas, but we saw Tennessee. I mentioned Idaho.
Well, first of all, you called them, the Trump administration, friendlier. There was no any type of friendly from the Biden administration. We never talked to them. They never told us what was going on. They would just sue us. So I would say it will be dramatically different. I don't know what the legislature is going to pass. No one really knows until they pass it and it's signed by the governor. But I do know this, we're going to get a lot fairer shake. They're not going to be politically targeting like laws that we pass to protect our state, whether it's immigration issues or others. Biden administration targets us on abortion stuff and immigration stuff. It's all politics, and they're using our taxpayer dollars to try to intimidate states like Texas. And we're not buying it. We're not going to be intimidated. We will fight them to death, because we should be able to do what we want in our state and not have some federal government trying to bully us around.
Well, I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate you coming here out to the Washington Times to meet with us.
Glad to do it. Just wish it was warmer here.
And good luck with the case.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for tuning in to the latest episode of Court Watch. If you have not subscribed yet to this podcast, please do so, and also feel free to email me interesting questions or topics you want explored about the legal reporting world. I'll do my best to answer them during each episode. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to hearing from you all soon. Listen to my podcast, Court Watch, at WashingtonTimes.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.